Thank you all, and welcome. My name is Jen Newman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the executive director of Beacon Hill Friends House, which is a Quaker center for community based in downtown Boston. And I'm excited to welcome you to hear my dear friend Greg Woods give our annual Ernest and Esther Weed Memorial Lecture. So this lecture is endowed in honor of Ernest and Esther, our longtime directors, and features a prominent interpreter of Quakerism sharing with us something that might help move us, might help us think about our faith and our practice more deeply. Today's speaker, Greg Woods, is giving the lecture Cripping Waiting Worship, Unlearning the Silence Around Ableism, where we will explore the intersections of disability justice, disability theology, and Quaker spirituality. So drawing from his personal experience growing up within the Religious Society of Friends, Greg will reflect on the pervasive silence around disability within faith communities and the need to unlearn ableism embedded in our practices of worship, care, and community. So this talk will invite us all together to consider how waiting worship can be cripped, reimagined through the lens of disability to become a space of access, solidarity, and liberation. I'd like to spend a moment to introduce you to Greg Woods, who I have been friends with, traveled in ministry with, worked with for almost a decade now. It's getting close to that. So Greg Woods, who uses he, him pronouns, is a disabled Quaker minister, theologian, facilitator, and writer based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he lives with his wife, Jenn, their child, Margaret, a puppy named Sofie, a cat named Kitty, and 4 very lively chickens. He currently serves as a program consultant with Beacon Hill Friends House, where he co-leads the Living Your Call Vocational Discernment program alongside myself. Greg has more than 15 years of experience in Quaker ministry and spiritual leadership, and currently he serves on the preaching team at New City Church in Minneapolis. His work is grounded in a passion for disability liberation theology and its connections to Quaker spirituality. Greg holds a Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and a Bachelor's of Arts from Earlham College. Greg also has with him Becca Marin Anderson, who's sitting to my left. Becca uses she, they pronouns and is serving as Greg's elder for this lecture. Becca is a queer and disabled writer, activist, and theologian. She serves as the Director of Pastoral Care and Community Connections for the Julian Way, a ministry offering spiritual care to people with disabilities, and is also on staff at the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ as the Mental Health Pastoral Fellow. They earned their Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary and are in the ordination process with the UCC. She lives in Northampton, Mass., where she enjoys playing Dungeons and Dragons, sampling many kinds of loose leaf tea, and entertaining her tiny gray cat, Jasmine. So I'm excited to welcome Greg and Becca here to deliver this lecture. We're going to enter into another few moments of worship, and out of that worship, Greg is going to begin. But thank you, friends, for joining us, and I hope we can connect in community and learn some deep things from Greg and his teaching today.
Thank you all for coming in person. Thank you all for coming online today. Uh, I see many names from people who have been with me throughout my life on the journey. So I am honored that you have all come, and so I am honored to I see people I don't know, and yeah. So, quit being waiting worship, unlearning the silent around ableism. I am going to be using slides. All my slides are right back on with dark text. Uh, I use slides to help people follow along with quotes and so they I won't be describing images because there are no images. Um, so the first slide is the title of the workshop. Read lecture. Beacon Hill Friends House, November 9th, 2025. At the age of 4 or 5, I recall walking into the meeting room and being completely enveloped in sunlight, waiting in from the large windows opposite the door I was entering. The light, the feeling I got from the light felt warm and welcoming. That is indeed my first memory of Quaker meeting for worship. The memory reminds me of a Thomas Kelly, a quote from the Quaker theologian Thomas Kelly from a short at the gathered meeting. And the text is on the slide where I will read. In the Quaker parts a group worship on the basis assignment comes special times when electric hush, a solemnity and depth of power steals over the worshippers. A blanket of divine covering comes over the room and a quickening presence pervades us, breaking down some part of the special privacy and isolation of our individual lives and bonding our spirits within a super individual life and power. The burning bush has been kindled in our midst, and we stand together on holy ground. Looking back, being bathed in the light is how I felt growing up. My Quaker meeting was a safe place where I felt loved and valued. In other places, especially at school, I didn't feel this love. I didn't feel valued. I remember at least once going to bed as a child crying and asking my mom, God, why did God do this to me? Why? I can still clearly see my mother standing in the hallway, light illuminating into the dark room. I don't remember what she did or say. I don't know what I would say when I would see a child in such pain and distress, asking big theological questions late at night. For most of my life, I hated myself. I hated my speech impediment. I wish I was someone else, someone normal. To make matters worse, I was misdiagnosed and was led to believe by doctors I would grow out of it. But the time I went through puberty, throughout childhood, I looked forward to high school, believing that one day I would wake up normal, somehow shedding the skin of my disgusting being into a teen that would be fully understood and finally accepted in my small town high school scene. Growing up, my refuge from the ableist road was the friends meeting I grew up in. I was treated as a equal from a early age, since there were not many other children in the meeting. I felt loved by these adults. Yet, the refuge I found in the meeting and in Quakerism as a whole was a place that never fully recognized my disabled body or any of the other disabled bodies at our small meeting and beyond in the Quaker world. For our time together today, I will explore the silence I found with a Quaker is around disabled uh, disability and ableism. I will explain how the harms both disabled and non-disabled people alike. I will also apply a quick critique of unprogrammed meaningful worship and talks about where do we capture the experimental faith that actually values and welcome disabled people and our gifts. Some notes before I go on the slide, it says some notes. Identity, and then 3 bullet points. Identity, voice, language, my opinions. I don't speak for others, and likely no oatmeal was harm. Um, I will use identity voice language throughout this presentation. Actually, that language instead of person voice language, with the example is a disabled person versus a person with a disability. I could give a whole talk on this point alone. There is both a personal and theological perspective that I cannot divorce myself from my lifelong disability. I see the world as a disabled person, and I will never know the world from a non-disabled perspective. Some people do prefer the person votes language, and that is their prerogative option, but I'm not using it in this talk. This talk is about my opinions, my theology, my perspective as a disabled white man who grew up in my early years in a working class background and later within a more solidly middle class, upper middle class background. My perspective has been shaped by a bit discussion over the past 2 decades with a Quaker spaces, racial justice spaces, and more recently in radical disability theology spaces. That being said, my words are about my experiences as a disabled white man. I don't speak for all disabled Quaker or all disabled people. And lastly, no oatmeal was harm in the creation of this talk because frankly, I hate oatmeal. So during the last 5 years, Jen Newman and I have traveled throughout the country delivering workshops based on the vocational discernment curriculum we have developed. On one of the trips, we were guests at a friend's meeting where we were going to speak at the worship. When I walked into the meeting room, they had some more comfortable chairs. By more comfortable, I mean like really padded chairs that was set up with signs saying for the authored abled. This quirky way of signal seating for disabled people rubbed me the wrong way. Then during coffee hour, I was asked by one friend if I was a visiting college student. I was 38 at this point. And yet another friend asked what country I was from, thinking that my speech impediment was an accent. They then kept pressuring me for an answer even after I tried to explain that I have a speech impediment. These incidences at the one meeting on a particular Sunday encapsulate what I meant to be a younger disabled person within the religious society events for the past 4 decades. Looking back at my life, Quakers have been pretty terrible in terms of disability, starting with my home meeting where I grew up. They have been largely silent on the matter, and not in a good way. As a child and youth, no one ever told me that being disabled was okay, that the inward light of Christ was still within me, not despite my disability, but because I, disabled at all, was made in the image of God. The word disabled is not a bad word, but in the ableist society that we live in, it treated as such. Therefore, we as a society think making up euphemism will make it sound better, like special needs, different, differently disabled, altered able, rather than speaking plainly about the human condition. Instead, these phrases actually further emphasize disabled people rather than empowering us. We do not ever use any of these terms unless a disabled person asks you to. Especially growing up in the 80s and 90s, the word disabled was especially avoided by parents like mine. To them, it seemed like an unveiled label to pin on their child. At the same time, it took me until I was in my first year of college at the age of 19 to start to understand I was disabled. It would take another 19 years to fully accept myself as disabled. In another way, disabled bodies can be further emphasized is by being held up as sources for inspiration just for living our life. The Australian disability activist who hasn't died, sadly, Stella Young, described it as inspirational porn. In a TED talk, she says, And I will have the quote on the slide. People, when they say you are a inspiration, they mean it as a compliment. I know why it happens. It because of the lie. It because we've been showed the lie that disability makes you exceptional, but it honestly doesn't. Disabled people do not exist to make others feel better about themselves, be sources of inspiration, or be sources of pity. Now I understand myself as having cerebral palsy, chronic tuberculosis, and being neurodivergent. Then I found these labels for myself. It has allowed me to better understand my body and mind. But I haven't fully understood before. I now know why my body and my mind operate differently from others. I can manage in ways rather than believing falsely that I am able-bodied. For all of the years, I knew I was different, but I never had a language to understand and explain how to talk about that difference. I do use the tool that took was I couldn't find a way to love myself because I never fully understood myself, my body, and my mind, and that was denied to me. There is a grief in recognizing that it took me so long to fully accept myself as a disabled person. I spent so many years with internal hate towards my disabled body. Exactly, this has festered into outright anger that has harmed and damaged many of my relationships. I've missed not being confident in my body and the knowledge of what I could fully do or not do. At the same time, I've grieved about not feeling comfortable around other disabled people. Internal ableism discouraged me from being in community with other disabled people. Because for years I wanted to appear normal. I wanted to fit in with the non-disabled community rather than identifying with my disabled peers who were largely outcast. Today I still hear some parents of disabled children say they don't want their child to be labeled disabled because of the negative connotation. That is that has happened because we continue to live in a ableist society, and the churches will cause children harm and self-hate like it did for me. I am here today before you to proclaim I am proud to be disabled. When I wrote that on social media during Disability Pride Month that past July, some people commented, I've never thought of you as disabled. They meant it as a kind gesture, but in reality, they are refused to fully see me as the beautiful, disabled human that I am, that God made me. Thankfully, God sees me as disabled. The theologian Nancy Elings writes in a groundbreaking book, The Disabled God, about how God embodied the disability at the crucifixion, where he builds the wounds. When that happened, God revealed that God is within us. In our pain and joy, we face as disabled people. She writes, the disabled God embodied the ability to see clearly the complexity and the misplacing of life and body without living in the spell. This revelation is of a God for us to celebrate joy and experience pain, not separately in time or space, but simultaneously. The disabled body allow us to view all of our body, disabled or not, as divinely made. We are known by the God, not by what our body can do, but by the act of being created. Our bodies do not define our relationship with God. Instead, that God created us as being good just as we are. One way that Quaker are silent about disability is when we put too much emphasis on equality to the point we do not recognize and honor our differences. I don't necessarily ascribe to the French testimony per se, because the creation of the testimony by Harold Pitton in the late 40s or early 50s was an attempt to categorize Francis Stewart witnesses to make it easy or to talk about generally what witnesses Quakers have taken over time. Instead, these categories have become a almost creed-like approach to the experimental faith. Yet, I will indulge for the moment to highlight a point. So we usually categorize testimony in the SPICE acronym SPICE: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality. Again, some people use spices, some people uh, change in our community with others. Some people add stewardship, but equality is usually there. Equality is a great idea when we focus on systematic changes that allow our worship and worship spaces to become more accessible to all. But the downside is we let equality assume that all our experiences are the same, especially when it comes to the divine. And by that, we lose a great diversity of thought and spiritual diversity. What would happen if we talk more about equity when sharing our experience of worship and the divine? There is a great wealth to knowledge and experience insight to gain when we appreciate and cultivate the differences between our experiences of the physical and the spiritual worlds through our different lenses, whether it awaits gender, sexuality, or disability. He said it well. Man disabled viewpoint approaches God and faith in ways that are uniquely different from a non-disabled person. I view God who feels pain and joy at the same time, a God who defies death to come back in a perfect disabled body for all to see and to experience. This viewpoint can help to reclaim our physical and spiritual bodies from harmful society norms that equates bodies as inherently bad as being uh, as beings that need to be controlled and dominated rather than being celebrated and honored. Another way Quakers are silent about disability is how we worship. The way we practice and program worship slightly divorces our physical bodies from our spiritual selves. We are so set in our ways, we have to sit in uncomfortable pews or chairs for the most part for exactly 8 hours. No noise is allowed except for spoken messages. If people diverge from the unwritten norms, they are made to feel uncomfortable. What about bodies that wiggle, stem, shake, or unable to sit for long periods? Are they not welcome? Does God only share messages if we sit still on squeaky benches? Should our messages only be given in oral communication, not sign language? Are there ever spaces that allow for interpretation for in our meeting for depth and heart of hearing people? Why have we lost in what it means to practice waiting, especially in such a sacred context? Silent and not, I should never be the end goal. It's just one mode of worship. I started referring to meeting for worship and waiting worship. Silence is not, and should never be the end goal. It is just one of the modes of worship. Since I worked in campus ministry, I started referring to meeting for worship as waiting worship, not silent worship. In the campus ministry, I saw students experimenting with worship using different modality, art, music, being outside in nature, discussing beats. Once we start to value silence at the angle of our practice together, it is the beginning of the depth of the experimental faith we have inherited from our forebears. What can we envision if we decide to scrap a faith based on silence and we build it based on experimentalism, on experimentation and waiting again? What does that mean? Let me give you some examples. Based on what a UCC pastor, Reverend Jack Katz, did with her congregation during the pandemic, I organized a meeting for worship on a river. We battled for a pit and gathered in a circle in the middle of the river for probably 15 minutes of radio worship people heading back to the launching point, which was a friend's backyard. Another time during the pandemic with I developed delivered soiled seeds and little flower pots to the children in the meeting I was serving. That Sunday, we planted seeds and talked about faith that continues to grow. Lastly, for the last 5 years, thanks to Jen Newman's efforts at the start of the pandemic to continue programming the COVID, Beacon Hill Friends House hosts midweek experiments and faithfulness. People I presented on a whole range of topics like poetry, experimental music, different kinds of lectional divina, and more. Forgetting the key experimental aspect of Quakerism allow us to stop envisioning how to make our worship spaces accessible. When I worked at Guilford College in North Carolina, there was a beloved place called the Hut. For decades, it was the heart of the campus ministry because it was where the longtime director had his office. I was tasked with helping to clean. After that director retired, I was tasked with helping to clean out and spruce up the hut. They were bookshelves filled with books that were seldom ever used, as well as odds and that accumulated over about 2 decades, all scattered throughout the building. While I was cleaning it out, a long-time staff member came over to help. While we were working, a lot of dust was in the air, and she mentioned offhand some of the community avoided the hut to our use of the fireplace in the winter. It wasn't friendly to students, staff, faculty members with asthma and other breathing issues. After hearing this perspective, I found other accessibility issues that I long failed to recognize in my 2 years there at the college. These issues included that neither the front door nor the side door were wide enough for a wheelchair. And even if the door was, the bathroom were definitely not accessible for people with limited mobility. He was a special place for so many, yet for years it remained inaccessible to others because of these barriers to access. Shortly after I left Guildford College, the hut was transformed into a college shop, while the center for spiritual life was located to a larger space that allowed the entire staff to work in the same building while also having dedicated meeting space and a separate dedicated prayer area. Uh, Yet, many alums, staff, and faculty were angered and saddened by the decision, and these feelings still exist today. Uh, 7 years after this was transformed. But I do understand why people have fond memories of the place. But was it the building itself or the spiritual community that were formed and forged during college that made the space special? Too often we turn our places into sacred spaces, forgetting what makes a space sacred is not the space per se, but when two or more are gathered in God's names, just as the Gospel of Matthew says. For goodness sake, one meeting in 17th century England worship in the cemetery because they were forbidden by law from having a meeting house. They built a bench in the wall around the meeting, around the cemetery, so they would go to the cemetery for worship. Even here, as we are gathered in the room where that serves as a meeting room every Sunday morning for decades, we are sitting in a room that for over 800 years showed a wealthy family as a boardroom that allowed the upper crust of society of Beacon Hill to gather for dances. So, too many of our meeting houses, retreat center, organizations, headquarters are accessible for meeting for a myriad of reasons. um, and the main reason is that our meetings houses have been exempt from the American with Disability Act, as are all religious organizations in the U.S. And sadly, the exemption was a concession to religious conservatives who didn't want to be forced to provide accommodation for people with AIDS because the ADA came out in the middle of the AIDS pandemic in 1990. Yes, many meetings have added ramps. Some have added amplifying equipment like this meeting. The organization became here friend's house. Yet, how many meeting has sensory room or have comfortable seating for people with a range of needs? And they say, apparently, these things exist at evangelical mega churches. Where I done a lot in the way of ministry for disabled children and their family in the past 10, 15, 20 years because they realized that the families were not being served. Which is ironic because 35 years ago they were okay to exclude disabled people. Sadly, my healing and accepting myself as a disabled person have been largely outside the Quaker world in the last couple of years. For the for the last almost 3 years, I've been attending a United Methodist Church in Minneapolis, where I now live. After working for Quakers, I needed a break. And during this break, I found a wonderful multiracial church that sent the queer people called New City. And some of the people are joining today from New City. The church has become a great space to deepen friendships, to explore my theology, I share my gift for preaching. At the same time, I started attending the Institute on Theology and Disability, a yearly conference dedicated to conversation around disability theology. I joined the Canadian Council to help make this annual conference more accessible to disabled people and uplift more disabled voices in the conversation. But the unique and frustrating thing about this disability theology is that the field is still dominated by non-disabled voices leading the conversation. Yet within this space, I found disabled friends from different denominations like Quaker, who helped me to become more comfortable as a disabled child of God. Within this group of people with a range of disability, we are celebrated and mourn with each other, and we move through a ableist road that actively does not want us to exist. Largely, Quakers need to work toward disability justice. It is a subject rarely talked about within Quaker social. For the most part, disability justice is not talked about by meetings or organizations. If it is, it is sometimes only as social media for one or two social media posts for Disability Pride Month in July. Much less don't expect the organization to use artists or image description in the community. Yet disability justice is a crucial issue, especially in the age of COVID that overlaps with other issues that Quaker deeply care about, such as the environment and racial justice. Due to the environmental injustice within our world, people become more apt to be disabled because of such factors as pollution or natural disaster. At the same time, the environmental injustices tend to affect people of color at greater proportion due to overt racial um to over racism over the years within the world, such as redlining and a lack of adequate services to community of color, among a whole host of injustices. Uh, Audrey wrote in her essay, there is no hierarchy of her presence. She wrote, I can't avoid the legacy of finding one form of oppression only. I cannot avoid to believe the freedom from intolerance is the right of only one particular group. I can't avoid to choose between the front upon where I much better these forces discrimination wherever they appear to destroy me. Yet, Quaker tend to keep these issues separate. Instead of seeing how these issues are so interwoven in our ableist society. By doing this, we do not fully recognize how our liberation are all tied up together, and we cannot shield away from how all of the issues affect every one of us. Lastly, I've seen many meeting welcoming messages that don't mention disabled people. I have also seen job descriptions from Quaker Entity that fail to mention they do not discriminate against disabled people. This lack of mentioning tells disabled people that we are not welcome. Within Quaker setting, we are often not asked about the accommodation we need. And if we ask for these accommodations, we are made to feel like it is a burden or special arrangement. Uh, not I'm not seen as a way to welcome us in, but a burden on the institution itself. The lack of emergency favor the able body and prioritizes that body, that able bodies are the normative for Quaker spaces. Yes, there is a lot of work left to do with in Quakerism and the world. Yet, I still have hope that we as Quaker can change and become more welcoming. I see it happening. People are starting to talk more openly about their disability. Journal, for example, had done a couple theme issues focused on disabilities in the last 10 years. Observing General Conference hosts a regular monthly Zoom for neurodivergent people to gather. Yet, much more remains to be done. As I end my message today, I ask you to consider some queries. How is your meeting your place of worship accessible or inaccessible? Please consider a range of disabilities. How can we reclaim a faith that value experiment and waiting that is welcoming to disabled people? And lastly, how can we start working towards disability justice? I see how I see the how it further intertwined with other causes we deeply care about. Thank you all for being with me today.